The day started like any other, quiet and slow, with the soft morning light slipping into the small living room. The world outside felt distant, almost muted, as if it wanted to give a peaceful start to the day. In the middle of this calm, a small knock on the door broke the silence. It was not loud or urgent, just a single tap that made the person living inside stop and look up with confusion. Hardly anyone visited them this early, and there were no plans or deliveries expected. When the door opened, no one stood outside. Only a medium-sized box rested on the floor, simple and old-looking, with faded corners and a slightly worn-out ribbon tied around it. There was no note, no sender name, nothing except a small tag with their address written in neat handwriting. For a moment they hesitated, wondering if the box had been left at the wrong door. But the address was correct, and the curiosity slowly grew stronger than the uncertainty. Inside, the home was still quiet as they carried the box to the table. They placed it down gently, as if it held something fragile. The ribbon untied easily, almost as though it had been waiting to be undone. When the lid came off, a soft, warm smell of old paper and polished wood filled the air. It was a familiar kind of scent, the kind that reminded them of libraries, old memories, and forgotten attics. The first thing they saw inside was a layer of delicate cloth, slightly yellowed from age. When they pulled it back, the real surprise revealed itself. There, neatly arranged, were rows of old music records and a small wooden case that looked handcrafted. Each record sleeve carried names they had heard many times, but never really explored deeply: Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, and Tchaikovsky. For a long moment, they simply stared. The collection looked untouched, almost new, despite being clearly decades old. There was a quiet beauty in it, something that felt almost too precious to have arrived unexpectedly at their door. They lifted one of the records gently, noticing the careful handwriting on the inside cover. Someone had written small notes next to each piece, describing how it made them feel. Some comments were thoughtful, some emotional, some simple, but all of them carried warmth. It felt strange. Who would send something like this? And why to them? They tried to recall if any relative in the past had ever mentioned such a collection, but nothing came to mind. Still, there was a faint sense of connection, something familiar about the handwriting, something comforting about the way the records were arranged. They opened the wooden case next. Inside was a small antique music player, beautifully crafted, with a polished brass arm and a smooth wooden finish. It looked like a piece taken out of another time. When they ran their fingers along the surface, a soft layer of dust brushed off. As though someone had kept it safe for many years and finally decided it was time for it to be used again, they sat down slowly, still unsure of what to think. The room felt different now, filled with a quiet expectation, as if the box had brought its own atmosphere with it. There was something inviting about the records. They looked like they carried stories, emotions, and memories of the person who once owned them. Without overthinking, they chose one record at random. It was a Mozart piece, light in color and simple in design. The handwriting inside described it as something that lifted the heart after a heavy day. The note made them smile. It felt personal, as if the sender wanted them to feel the same comfort. They placed the record on the player carefully. The soft scratch of the needle meeting the surface filled the quiet room. Then came the sound, gentle at first, almost shy, then slowly clearer, brighter. The opening notes floated into the air like tiny sparks of joy. Warming the room instantly, they closed their eyes without meaning to, letting the melody wash over them. It felt like being wrapped in a soft blanket. The sound carried a lightness that settled somewhere deep inside their chest, easing a weight they didn't realize had been building for months. Mozart's music had a way of lifting everything around it, turning a normal day into something softer, more meaningful. While listening, their mind drifted to the last few years' tough days, endless routines, the quiet loneliness that sometimes crept in without warning. They had always liked music, but never with the kind of attention or emotion this moment brought. It felt as though the music was speaking directly to them, filling empty spaces they hadn't known needed filling. The record played gently as they sat still, feeling both peaceful and curious. Why had someone sent them this? And why did it feel so strangely perfect? They picked up the cloth that had been inside the box and found something tucked under the corner. A folded paper, aged but carefully preserved. When they opened it, their heartbeat quickened slightly. It was a note, written in the same handwriting found inside the record sleeves. The message was short, simple, and full of quiet affection. It said, "Thought you might find comfort in these. They helped me in my own difficult times. I hope they bring your heart some peace too." There was no signature, no name to identify the sender, but something about the tone felt gentle and familiar, like it came from someone thoughtful, someone who understood what the listener had been feeling lately. It didn't matter that the identity was still a mystery. The message alone was enough to stir something warm inside. The music continued to play, filling the small home with a soft glow of sound. Each note danced lightly, creating a kind of harmony that touched even the quiet corners of the room. They felt themselves breathing slower, deeper, as if the stress they had been carrying was finally letting go, even if just for a moment. When the record finished, they sat still in silence, letting the last note linger in their mind. It felt like something had shifted slightly inside them. This box, this music, this unexpected gift had suddenly seemed important, meaningful in a way they couldn't easily explain. They looked at the rest of the collection. Beethoven's bold symphonies, Chopin's emotional piano pieces, Tchaikovsky's powerful melodies. Each one seemed like another doorway to something they had never explored before. The idea of discovering each piece slowly, day by day, brought a feeling of quiet excitement. The room no longer felt empty. The box on the table no longer felt like a mystery. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something, maybe a journey, maybe a change, maybe a chance to feel differently about life. They placed the Mozart record back in its sleeve, handling it with care, almost respect. Then they looked again at the note, reading the simple message one more time. It felt like a whisper of kindness from someone who understood the quiet struggles they rarely shared with anyone. The day moved on slowly, but something in the air remained different. The music had left a soft imprint on the room, a kind of peace that stayed long after the record stopped playing. They found themselves thinking about the sound, the gentle melody, the emotions it had stirred. It wasn't just music. It was something deeper. As evening approached, they set the box in a safe place, knowing they would return to it soon. The old music player remained on the table, ready for another record when the time felt right. They felt strangely connected to it, as if it had been waiting for them. Before going to sleep, they glanced at the box once more. The day had brought an unexpected difference into their life. Something small, simple, but powerful enough to shift their thoughts. Tomorrow. They promised themselves they would listen again, and for the first time in a long while. The thought of tomorrow felt gentle, welcoming, and full of possibility. The next morning arrived slowly. With the soft light of dawn slipping through the curtains and settling gently on the room, the house felt unusually calm, as though the music from the day before had left a quiet glow behind. They woke with the memory of the Mozart piece still fresh in their mind, the melody lingering like a soft echo. It had been a long time since something so simple made them feel so peaceful. They moved through the morning routine without rushing. Even the small acts, boiling water, setting a cup on the table, opening the window to let in the morning air, felt lighter. It was as if the music had opened a little space inside them, giving their thoughts somewhere new to rest. The box sat on the table exactly where it had been left the previous day. The sight of it brought a small smile. They didn't want to rush through the collection, but the curiosity felt stronger than before. There was something comforting about knowing these old records were waiting, each carrying its own world of sound. After breakfast, they walked over to the table and removed the lid with the same gentle care as before. The records looked peaceful, each sleeve soft with age but preserved with love. Their hand rested on one for a moment before picking it up. This time, they chose a Beethoven record, not because they knew much about him, but because something about the deep, dark colors of the sleeve pulled their attention. Inside was another handwritten note. It said, "When your heart feels heavy, his music will help you breathe again." The message was simple, yet it carried a comforting weight. It made them wonder again about the sender. Someone who knew their quiet struggles, someone who understood what heavy days felt like. The thought made the experience feel even more personal. They placed the record on the player. The needle touched the surface with a soft crackle. Then, slowly, Beethoven's music filled the room. The sound was deeper, more intense than Mozart. It carried strength, as if it came from a place of deep emotions, pain, determination, courage. The strong notes wrapped around them, not gently like the day before, but firmly, reminding them that even heavy feelings could be turned into something powerful. They sat on the couch, leaning back, letting the music surround them. Their eyes closed without thinking about it. The sound seemed to speak of storms and sunlight, of days when the world felt too heavy and days when it felt like anything was possible. It was different from the lightness of Mozart. Beethoven's music made them feel grounded, stronger, and somehow understood. It reminded them of the last few months. There had been moments of doubt, moments when they questioned whether they were moving forward or simply drifting. Work had been tiring, personal life had been quiet, and their days often felt like they blended into each other. But as the music played, it felt like their emotions were being shaken awake. Not in a painful way, but in a way that reminded them that it was okay to feel deeply. They sat there for a long time, letting the music move through them. Sometimes the notes rose in fierce waves. Other times, they softened into gentle whispers. The shift from strength to calm felt like a conversation between two sides of the same heart. When the record finished, but this time the silence felt different. It felt strong, not empty. They looked at the record sleeve once more, reading the handwritten message again. The sender clearly understood that Beethoven's music wasn't just sound. It was emotion shaped into melody. It held the kind of strength one needed on days when life felt overwhelming. They placed the record back into its sleeve with care and set it aside. For a moment, they wondered how someone had known to send this collection to them at this exact time. The thought brought a quiet warmth, like a hidden connection waiting to be discovered. The rest of the morning passed gently. They opened their windows wider, letting sunlight flood the room. They felt more awake, more aware of the small details around them, the soft hum of the city outside, the gentle sway of the curtains, even the distant sound of birds. Later in the day, they sat at the table with a notebook they hadn't used in months. Something about the music made them want to write, not in a structured way, not as a story or a plan, just thoughts, simple and honest. They wrote about how the music felt, how the room had changed, how their mind had quieted. They wrote small memories that had resurfaced while listening, moments from childhood, times when life felt simpler, times when dreams felt clearer. None of it needed to be perfect. It felt good simply to let the thoughts flow. They didn't notice how much time had passed until the light outside began to soften into late afternoon. When they finally closed the notebook, it felt like they had released something, as if the words had been waiting inside them for a long while. As evening approached, they found themselves drawn back to the box. This time, though, they didn't choose another record. They simply rested their hand on it, appreciating the quiet presence it brought into the room. The music from the morning still lingered inside them. Beethoven's bold melodies had left a kind of strength in their chest, steady, warm, grounding. It made them feel like they weren't just moving through the day, but actually living it. They thought back to the handwritten notes inside the sleeves. The sender had taken the time to write these messages with care, hoping the words and the music would bring comfort or calm. It made them wonder more about the person behind the box. Someone who appreciated music deeply, someone who believed in its power to heal. As night settled, they prepared a simple meal and sat near the window. The air felt crisp, and the sky looked soft with clouds drifting across it. Everything felt slower, but in a way that made them feel connected to the moment. After finishing their meal, they took a quiet walk outside. The streets were peaceful, with only a few people passing by. They walked without a destination, thinking about the music, the box, the mysterious sender. The world felt a little different, a little brighter. The calm evening air mixed with the memory of Beethoven's music created a sense of balance inside them. It felt like a reminder that life held both heavy and light moments, and both were part of the journey. When they returned home, Kate glanced once more at the box on the table. It no longer felt like a strange mystery. It felt like a companion of sorts, something meant to arrive when it did. Just before going to bed, they stood for a moment near the table and whispered a soft thank you not to anyone in particular, but to the moment itself, to the music that had filled the room, to the unexpected gift that had brought a gentle shift into their life, lying in bed. They closed their eyes and let the memory of the melodies drift through their mind. The light notes from Mozart and the strong ones from Beethoven blended softly, creating a quiet harmony inside them. Tomorrow, they thought they would explore another piece from the collection. Maybe Chopin, maybe Tchaikovsky. But for now, they rested with a calm heart. Knowing that something special had begun, sleep came easily that night, gentle and peaceful. Like music settling into silence after the final note fades away, the next day began with a soft light spreading across the sky. The kind of gentle morning that made everything feel calm before the day fully woke up. They rose slowly, stretching out the last traces of sleep as the memory of Beethoven's music returned to them. It felt like something still rested in their chest, a calm strength left behind by the bold notes from the day before. During breakfast, they glanced toward the table, where the box sat quietly, almost waiting. The thought of exploring another record brought a warm spark of anticipation. They didn't rush. Instead, they moved through the morning with a steady ease, feeling a natural pull toward the collection. When they finally lifted the lid of the box again, they took a moment just to look inside. Each record felt like a doorway, each composer like a different world waiting to be discovered. Their fingers brushed lightly over Chopin's sleeve. The design was beautiful, soft, elegant, a handwritten note tucked inside. They picked it up carefully and opened the sleeve. The note read, "When the heart needs softness, his music will understand what you cannot put into words." The words struck something gentle inside. Chopin's name was familiar, but they had never listened closely to his music before. The idea of hearing something that could speak to emotions that were hard to describe felt comforting. They placed the record on the player, lowered the needle, and waited. The soft crackle that followed was quickly replaced by the quiet, delicate sound of the piano. The melody that drifted out was tender, almost fragile, like a whisper that carried more meaning than its softness suggested. They sat down slowly, feeling the music settle into the room like a warm breath. Chopin's notes moved differently. They didn't rise with explosive power like Beethoven or dance lightly like Mozart. Instead, they flowed gently, with a kind of honest emotion that seemed to understand sadness, hope, and quiet longing all at once. As they listened, something inside them shifted. Memories surfaced without effort. Small moments from childhood, moments when they felt love, moments when they felt lost, times when life felt overwhelming, times when they wished they could express their emotions but didn't know how. Chopin's music wrapped around each memory like a soft cloth, not trying to change anything, just embracing it gently. It felt like someone was sitting beside them, listening silently, offering comfort without asking for anything in return. A few tears formed without warning, not from pain, but from release. The music seemed to give permission to feel things they had been holding inside for too long. They didn't wipe the tears away immediately. Instead, they let themselves feel, trusting the softness of the sound. The melody continued to flow, sometimes slow, sometimes slightly faster, but always full of feeling. It was as if Chopin had written the music for moments exactly like this quiet mornings when the heart needed a gentle hand to guide it. As the record played, they looked at the small objects around the room. Everything seemed more meaningful. Somehow the notebooks, the books on the shelf, even the old lamp in the corner. It all felt like part of a bigger story that they were slowly becoming aware of. When the record came to an end, they sat quietly for a long time. The silence after the music felt tender. They could still feel the melody inside them, soft and steady. Eventually, they stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the world moved gently. People walking on the street below, leaves swaying in the breeze. The faint sound of distant traffic. For once, it all felt connected. They breathed deeply, letting the fresh air move through them. The emotions the music had brought up were still present. But instead of feeling heavy, they felt warm and meaningful. Later in the day, they decided to go for a walk. The streets were familiar, but something about the day felt new. It was as if they were seeing everything with a clearer mind. The rhythm of their steps matched the lingering softness of the music. As they walked, they noticed a small park nearby. They hadn't visited it in months, maybe even years. Today, though, the park felt inviting. They stepped inside and found an empty bench under a tree. The leaves above whispered softly in the wind. They sat down and let their thoughts drift. Chopin's music had opened something inside them, something they hadn't touched in a long time. They found themselves thinking about their life, their dreams, their quiet fears. Not in a heavy way more, in a gentle, reflective way, as if they were finally giving themselves permission to feel everything honestly. While sitting there, they noticed a couple of people passing by, an older man walking slowly with a cane, a child running with bright laughter, a young woman reading a book on another bench. Life looked simple, yet meaningful. Every person seemed to hold a story. They wondered what the sender of the box had felt while listening to these exact pieces. Perhaps they had also sat somewhere like this, letting the music guide their thoughts. It made the connection feel stronger. After a while, they took out the notebook they had written in the day before. They opened to a blank page and began writing. The words came softly. Some music doesn't just fill a room. It fills the heart in ways the mind doesn't always understand. They paused, feeling the truth of those words. They wrote more thoughts about memories, emotions, the unexpected beauty of the music. It didn't matter what the sentences looked like. What mattered was that they were finally letting their inner world speak. Time passed quietly in the park. Eventually, the sun began to move lower in the sky. They closed their notebook and walked home slowly, feeling lighter. When they returned home, the box was still on the table, waiting patiently. They touched the lid gently. It no longer felt like a mysterious gift. Instead, it felt like a guide leading them through parts of themselves they had ignored for too long. As the evening settled, they brewed a warm drink and sat near the player again. They didn't play another record show. Pan's music still lingered softly inside them. They didn't want to interrupt the feeling. They thought again about the handwritten notes left in each sleeve. The person who wrote them had understood something important, that music could heal without saying anything, that it could comfort without asking for anything in return. They felt grateful. Grateful for the music, for the emotions it brought up, for the sense of connection that was slowly growing inside them. Before going to sleep, they sat down on the couch, wrapped in a quiet calm. They thought about how different the last few days had felt, how something as simple as old records had changed the rhythm of their thoughts. Their mornings, their evenings. The music had become a silent friend until, honest, never demanding as they lay in bed. They closed their eyes and imagined the soft piano notes once more. The melody drifted through their mind like a warm breeze. They breathed slowly, letting the music inside them settle into a peaceful stillness. Tomorrow, they thought they would listen to Tchaikovsky. But for now, they allowed the quiet comfort of Chopin's music to stay with them, holding them gently as sleep arrived like a soft, familiar friend. The next morning arrived with a soft breeze coming through the window, carrying a quiet sense of peace with it. They woke slowly, still wrapped in the gentle calm that Chopin's music had left behind the night before. The sunrise painted the room with warm shades of orange, making everything look softer, almost comforting. For a moment, they lay still, thinking about how the last few days had changed them, not in big dramatic ways, but in small, quiet shifts, calmer heart, clearer thoughts, a sense of connection they had not felt in a long time. The box on the table had become more than just a gift. It felt like a companion guiding them gently through different emotions. After getting ready, they sat down for breakfast. Their eyes kept drifting toward the wooden box, almost as if it were calling them. There was one composer left to explore, Tchaikovsky. The thought brought a mix of curiosity and excitement. They had heard his name many times, mostly associated with grand emotional pieces, but they had never listened closely. When they finally lifted the lid, the record seemed to glow in the morning light. They picked up the Tchaikovsky sleeve and noticed the handwritten note tucked inside. The message read, "When you need to feel alive again, his music will remind you of the strength inside your heart." The words hit them deeply. They had felt many emotions in the last few days: peace, strength, softness, but feeling alive was something they hadn't thought about in a long time. Life had become routine, predictable, quiet. Maybe too quiet. They placed the record on the player and gently lowered the needle. A soft crackle filled the air before the music began. The first notes came in slowly, then grew richer, fuller, deeper. Tchaikovsky's music moved differently. It carried intensity, beauty, sadness, and hope all at once. It felt like listening to a river that changed from calm to fierce, then calm again. As the music filled the room, something inside them shifted once more. Their heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the melody. The sound made them sit straighter, breathe deeper, pay closer attention. It wasn't peaceful like Chopin, nor joyful like Mozart. It wasn't bold in the same way as Beethoven. Instead, Tchaikovsky's music felt like life itself, unpredictable, emotional, powerful. The melody rose suddenly, carrying all the feelings they usually kept locked away. Memories flooded back, moments of happiness, loss, excitement, fear, and hope. The music didn't shy away from complicated emotions. It embraced all of them and turned them into something beautiful. They felt their eyes sting with tears again, not out of sadness this time, but from feeling deeply alive. The music reminded them of moments when life felt bright and full, even if those moments were far in the past. While the record played, our mind drifted to the mysterious person who had sent the box. Whoever it was clearly knew the power of music. Each handwritten note had been placed with care, almost like a guide meant to help them rediscover what they had been missing. The record continued, shifting between soft, gentle passages and strong emotional bursts. Each change in the music felt like a reminder that life had its own waves, sometimes calm, sometimes overwhelming, but always moving. By the time the piece ended, the room felt charged with emotion. They sat for a long moment, breathing slowly, letting everything settle inside them. After a few minutes, they stood up and opened the window wider. The cool air touched their face, and the fresh scent of morning mixed with the last traces of the melody. They felt awake more than they had in months. They went for a walk outside. The world felt strangely vibrant. Colors looked brighter, sounds seemed sharper. Even the simple sight of people walking down the street felt meaningful. It was as if Tchaikovsky's music had opened their senses. Making everything feel more real, they headed to the park again, feeling drawn to the calmness it offered. The trees stood tall, leaves swaying softly. Children played in the distance, dogs ran across the grass, and older people sat quietly on benches. Life was moving all around them. They found a bench near a small pond, where reflections shimmered on the surface of the water. Sitting there, they took out their notebook. They didn't plan what to write, they simply allowed the pen to move freely. Some music reminds you to breathe. Some reminds you to feel. His reminds you to live, they wrote. They looked at the line for a long time, feeling how true it was. Tchaikovsky's music had made them feel awake in a way they hadn't expected. Thoughts drifted back to the sender once again. They wondered if this person had also felt lost at some point in their life. If they had turned to these pieces for guidance, strength, or comfort. Maybe the sender wanted to pass on the same healing they had once received. The sun rose higher, warming their skin as they sat by the pond. Birds moved across the sky in gentle patterns, and the sound of water brushing against the edges of the pond created its own kind of quiet music. After writing for a while, they closed the notebook and leaned back against the bench. Their mind felt clear, their heart steady. They watched people around them, noticing small details, the smile of a passerby, the soft conversation between two friends, the way sunlight sparkled off the water. Everything felt connected. Hours passed softly before they decided to head home. When they entered the house, the box on the table was the first thing their eyes landed on. They approached it slowly, almost with reverence. They opened the lid again, not to play another record, but to look at the collection as a whole. Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Tchaikovsky. For composers from different times and different worlds, yet each had spoken to them in a unique way. It felt like they had traveled through 4 emotional landscapes. Mozart had lifted their heart with joy. Beethoven had given them strength. Chopin had touched their deeper feelings. And Tchaikovsky had awakened something alive inside them. They gently touched the edge of each sleeve, thinking about how these records had changed the last few days. They felt different now, more open, more aware. More willing to feel. As evening settled, they brewed a warm drink and sat near the table. A quiet realization washed over them. The box had brought them back to themselves. The world inside them felt wider now, filled with thoughts and feelings they had forgotten or buried under daily responsibilities. The music had given them space to breathe again. Later that night, they decided to do something they hadn't done in a long time. They looked up nearby events and found a small classical music performance happening in a local hall the following weekend. Without hesitating, they booked a ticket. The idea of hearing live music sparked a sense of excitement inside them. It felt like the next natural step in their journey, an extension of the emotions they had discovered through the records before going to bed. They took out the handwritten notes from each record sleeve and placed them in a neat line on the table. Each note felt like a stepping stone. Joy, strength, softness. They read each one again slowly, feeling the weight and meaning of every sentence. After putting the notes back carefully, they turned off the lights and sat quietly in the dim glow coming from the window. The city outside was peaceful, lights flickering gently like tiny stars as they got into bed. They realized something important. This wasn't just about the music. It was about reconnecting with life, with emotions, with memories. With themselves, they closed their eyes with a calm soul, ready for whatever the next day would bring. For the first time in a long while, the world felt full again. Not overwhelming, but beautifully full, like a melody that stayed in the heart. Long after the final note had faded, the days that followed felt slower, almost softer, as if the world itself had paused to take a breath. After all the moments that had shaped the journey from the small room where everything began to the grand place where the music reached its peak, there was finally space to look back and understand what it all meant. The person who had carried this dream for so long now moved through life with a calm that hadn't existed before. It was the calm that comes when someone learns to hear life differently. The same way they learned to listen to music. Even the mornings felt lighter. The sun coming through the window seemed a little warmer, and the quiet moments no longer felt empty. They felt full, filled with memories that were finally settled in the right places. The collection of classical pieces that had once been only a dream had grown into something real, something alive. Each composer, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, felt like an old friend who had walked with them through every stretch of this journey. Sometimes the person would sit with the collection, not to study it or analyze it, but just to listen. The sound of the piano, the strings, the gentle rise and fall of melodies, they settled in the room like visitors. Each note felt familiar and yet new at the same time. It was as if the music had learned them just as they had learned the music. It fit into their days in a way nothing else ever had. The people around them began to notice the change too. There was a softness in their voice, a patience in their steps. Before, the person often felt rushed, as if life was always pulling them in many directions. But now, the direction felt clearer, even without knowing exactly where the road led. What mattered was that the journey wasn't pushing them anymore. They were moving with purpose. And that purpose came from a place that was quiet but strong. One evening, they decided to revisit the place where they had first shared the music with others. The small hall looked the same, though it somehow felt smaller than before. Maybe it wasn't the place that had changed, but the person who walked into it. The chairs were lined neatly, the stage calm and still. They sat in the back row, just for a moment. Letting memory fill the space, it didn't take long to remember everything that had happened there, the nerves, the excitement, the rush of emotion that came when the music finally filled the room. They remembered how their hands shook the very first time they played a recording of Beethoven's gentle movements or Mozart's lively passages. They remembered faces in the audience, some curious, some unsure, and some completely still, as if the music had frozen them in awe. Sitting there again felt strange, but in a peaceful way. They were alone this time, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt complete, as if coming back was the final step that was always meant to be taken. Later that week, Person took the collection to a quiet park. They had walked through this park many times before, but today they brought the music with them. The trees rustled softly with the wind, and the sound of distant conversations floated through the air. None of it disturbed the moment. Instead, everything blended together, the world around them and the world inside the music. They found a bench near the small lake where ducks usually gathered. The water was still, except for small ripples made by the birds. When the person put on their headphones and let the music play, something in the scene changed. The water shimmered differently. The trees moved differently. Even the air felt different. It wasn't the first time music had shaped the world for them, but it was the first time they truly understood how deeply it was connected to life itself. It wasn't only about beautiful sounds or emotional moments. It was about recognizing that music gave shape to feelings that were too big to carry alone. They sat there a long time, listening to pieces that once felt impossible to reach. Now those same pieces felt like companions. They carried memories, lessons, and quiet reminders. Mozart reminded them of joy, of the playful side of life. Beethoven reminded them of strength, of standing firm even when everything feels heavy. Chopin reminded them of softness, of the tender parts of the heart that often get overlooked. And Tchaikovsky reminded them of bravery, of expressing emotions fully without fear. As the sun began to set, the colors in the sky shifted gently. Orange, pink, and gold spread across the water. It felt almost unreal, as if nature itself was playing along with the last notes of the piece still echoing in their ears. When the music finally ended, the silence felt like a final bow. That evening, when they returned home, they walked with a slow steadiness. Not tired, not rushed, simply present. This presence had come from everything they had learned during the journey. Not just about music, but about themselves. In the following days, more people began reaching out to them. Some wanted to hear the collection. Some wanted to learn about the journey. Some just wanted to know how the music had changed them. The person shared everything, but not to impress anyone. They shared because they knew what it felt like to search for something meaningful, something grounding. And if their story could help someone else find that feeling, even in a small way, it was worth sharing. They never planned to become a guide for others. But somehow it happened naturally. People trusted their voice, not because it was loud or special, but because it was honest. And that honesty came from living every step of the journey with sincerity as the seasons changed. So did the path ahead of them. But the collection continued to travel with them no matter where they went. It was more than music now. It was a reminder of everything they had overcome, everything they had grown into, and everything they still hoped to become. One night, they sat by their window, listening once again to the pieces that had shaped the most important chapter of their life. Outside, the sky was filled with stars. Inside, the room felt warm. They closed their eyes and let the melody wash over them. And in that quiet moment, the person realized something simple but powerful. The journey wasn't ending. It was only changing. Everything they had lived through was not the peak of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. A beginning shaped by the music that had become a part of them. The music that had shown them who they were. With a deep breath, they opened their eyes and smiled softly. Whatever came next, they were ready. Because once a person truly learns to listen to music to the world, to themselves they carry that ability for life. And that was the real once in a lifetime gift they had been searching for all along.